Today we're going to reveal the truth about a vegan diet, and it might surprise you, and there's a handful of things you need to consider when deciding, is this diet right for me or should I avoid it at all costs? So let's get into it and let's get to the bottom of whether or not basketball players should be following a vegan diet. And before we get into the video, as always, if going on a vegan diet is an ethical or religious choice, that is your choice 100%, and I support that 100%. We are purely looking at a vegan diet from a health and performance standpoint in this video. So I just want to make that very clear, because this sort of diet has become very popular nowadays. You even see documentaries coming out with very questionable science encouraging people to go vegan and cut out all animal products. So if you're going to go vegan based on a specific rationale, again, ethical or religious reasons, that's totally fine. 100% respect that. But if you're deciding whether or not to do it for performance reasons, you need to have all the facts before you decide whether or not this diet is actually right for you. And oftentimes, those documentaries aren't the best source of those objective facts. Now, before we get into the concerns with a vegan diet, let's go over the benefits, because there are some inherent benefits when most people go vegan. Typically, when most people go vegan, their fruit and vegetable and whole grain intake increases. And that's why you see a lot of basketball players, like for example, Kyrie Irving went vegan a while back. I don't think he's still vegan, but he went vegan a while back. He's like, oh my gosh, I feel so much better. Usually that happens because of that increase in fruit, vegetable, and whole grain intake. So that is a major plus. But the thing is, most Netflix documentaries and YouTube videos you're going to see on this subject with people pushing the vegan diet down your throat doesn't really take that moderate approach. They take this sort of extremist approach of you either choose to eat meat or not to eat meat. You can't be anywhere in between, and you have to not eat meat if you want to be healthy and perform well, because meat is pretty much poisonous for you. And that's a little bit questionable. So let's dive into some of the main concerns that I have about the vegan diet and that you need to consider when deciding if this approach is really right for you from a performance standpoint. First things first, and the most obvious point here is your protein intake, both amount and quality. Typically, when you go vegan, it's going to be a little bit more difficult to eat enough protein, because where do you find most of your protein in your diet? You find them in animal products like meat, poultry, fish, dairy, whey protein, which is also a derivative of dairy. You get the point, mostly animal products. That's not to say there aren't plant-based protein sources. There are plenty, but it just makes things a little more difficult, or a lot more difficult in some cases, especially if you don't like certain plant-based protein options. Like if you're not a fan of tofu or tempeh, it's gonna be tough to meet your protein needs as a plant-based basketball player. And on top of that, the protein quality of a vegan diet tends to be less than the protein quality on an omnivorous diet, or a diet that includes plants and animals. One reason for this is that plant-based protein sources tend to be a bit less bioavailable, so your body is not able to absorb and utilize them as effectively. And also, many plant-based sources, most plant-based sources, tend to be incomplete proteins. They don't have all 9 essential amino acids. Essential amino acids are the amino acids that we need to get from food. We can't produce them on our own. And animal-based proteins have all 9 of them. Every single animal-based protein is going to have all 9 essential amino acids. Plant-based proteins, some do, and some have all 9, but they're in disproportionate amounts, and there's really low amounts of certain ones, really high amounts of others, and some just don't have any of specific amino acids. So that's one thing we need to consider. And as a result, the protein needs of a vegan athlete are going to be higher. And you kind of see where that can get a little tricky. It's harder to meet your protein needs as it is for most people on a vegan diet, but then you also need to eat more protein to meet your protein needs and get the same effect. Specifically, about 20% more protein than if you were eating an animal-based diet. So it's a tricky situation. You can make it work with planning, but it's not the easiest thing in the world, and it might not be the most enjoyable thing in the world, especially if you enjoy animal products. So it is something to consider when you're deciding, should I do this, should I not? Another thing we need to consider when deciding whether or not you should go vegan is the fact that when you go vegan, you're going to run into some issues with nutrient deficiencies, specifically vitamin B12, which you're only going to find in animal-based products or products that are fortified in vitamin B12. You could also run into issues with iron intake, because plant-based iron is a bit less bioavailable. It's not absorbed as easily as animal-based iron or heme iron. And also other nutrients like zinc and essential fatty acids like omega-3s. You're gonna have issues finding those if you don't plan for it effectively. Again, with proper supplementation, you can make it work, but it just makes things a bit harder. And the main issue here is that a lot of athletes that choose to go this route aren't taking those things into consideration. So if you're gonna go this route, I'd recommend doing your research, doing your due diligence, researching what nutrients you're going to need to be prioritizing here. I'm going to put out a video next week going over how to actually make this work if you do choose to go that route. So I don't want this video to be purely bashing the vegan diet. You can make it work. And again, especially if you're doing it for ethical reasons, religious reasons, you can 100% make it work. It just takes a lot more planning. And when most athletes don't even want to plan the basics with their nutrition anyway, what makes you think that most athletes would benefit from going vegan if they're not going to be willing to do that extra planning that it takes to actually be successful on a vegan diet? So my main message is take those things into consideration. Is this something you can actually see yourself following? And also realize that you don't need to go vegan to get the benefits of a vegan diet. For example, the main benefit is you're going to eat more fruits, vegetables, whole grains. You can do that while still eating meat. You can do that while still eating poultry, fish, dairy. That is not mutually exclusive. You can do both things at the same time. You do not need to go vegan to get the benefits of a vegan diet. So that's also something to consider. So if you're looking at it from a purely performance perspective, and you want to make nutrition as easy as possible, I personally would not recommend it. Again, if you're doing it for ethical reasons because you don't believe in harming animals, stuff like that, that's great. There's going to be some more planning that you need to consider when actually making this work from a performance perspective. Same thing if you're doing it for religious reasons. You want to really maximize your performance 100%. You can be successful with it. Just make sure you plan for it. And again, I'm going to put out a video next week going over how to actually make it work and how to plan for it, what things you need to take into consideration. So make sure you're on the lookout for that. And my question for you going away from this video is, have you tried the vegan diet before? How did it go for you? What was your experience with it? Was it a positive one, negative one? Let me know in the comments down below. And if that video is up, I'll put it up on the screen right now so you can watch that. If not, it will be up next week. And in the meantime, you can check out this series on how to build muscle as a basketball player. And as always, I appreciate you tuning in, and I will see you in that next video.